They don't know anything about you, but you know yourself and you know your story, and therefore you have a perspective. You have a perspective, they have a perception, and this is life. And this happens in every capacity. So from young, as a young kid, I always had this thing where I could like literally, after a while, I became a tool where like, well, let me put myself in this person's shoes and see what they're doing and see how it feels. And that's where coaching came into play. Now, I'm not saying I'm an expert at this in every way possible. Trust me. There's a lot of times that I don't get my wife's perspective, for example, or just other people's perspective. And by the way, this is not an all and be all truth, but the concept is the perspective versus perception causes a duality, causes a split. It causes this good, this bad, this right, this wrong, this satisfied, dissatisfied, the constant splits of endless amounts of separation, of division. This is law. This is law. This is something that is law. And so my story evolved more and more, but just to give you the basis, just to give you the foundation, that gave me the tool to walk in the world where if I saw something I didn't fully understand, if I didn't fully understood it, if I didn't understand it, I was conditioned to judge it. But now, as I've gotten older, as I got more mature, as I evolved more, now I take a moment and I just try to walk through that person. And then you hear again, the next split is what? Empathy and sympathy. Because then you could have sympathy for something, right? You could have sympathy for a person that is struggling, for example. Like you see them struggling and you're like, oh man, that looks rough. Or you can have empathy for a person. Like, man, I remember when I was going through that. Let me go and help them. Empathy usually leads to some form of action because you could feel it in your cells, you could feel it in your body. It starts to press on your pain points. It starts to press on your triggers. That's why empathy is so strong. Now, why do I bring up empathy and sympathy? Well, perspectives bring about a lot of empathy. But when you have perspectives and perceptions constantly, then you're going to have a mixed bag of empathy, sympathy. You're going to have a mixed bag of where like, I don't really care about what happens over there because it doesn't really affect me, right? It's like I care because it's wrong, like it doesn't look right, but it doesn't affect me. And so we live in this world where that is the constant. And that's another law. It's constant. It's a loop. So you get into this cycle. You get into this cycle of perspective, perception, sympathy, empathy, my emotion versus your emotion. Let's go a layer deeper. So we have our personal, this would happen to me, right? Perspective. This is my trauma. This happened to me. But then we also have a collective. There's a larger trauma and pain or story outside of yours. You're part of a much bigger web. This is the connecting of the dot theory, right? So again, to share more of me so I could make it deeper and more personal is, so adopted. Mom was on drugs. Mom got cleaned up. Mom got cleaned up on the day that I was born. So, congratulations to her. Every birthday, it's also congratulations to her. Now, why am I bringing this up? There's these points. You know, like it just so happens that on my birthday, the day I was born, she chooses to get herself out of a dark place. So her evolution is sometimes based upon my birth. And we have this constant connection of points that are always happening, that if we are aware of it, we can appreciate it and almost see the path. You can actually start seeing how things are mapping out, so to speak, right? And we'll dive deeper in later episodes of ancient people that had the ability to weed through the laws of physics, weed through the laws of the universe, probably just walk through and get into another dimension. Sounds crazy, but we thought AI was crazy. And trust me, based off my research I've been doing, it's about to get crazier. So the reality of it is that we have all of these different points. And the next point that came after many years later was my daughter being born. My daughter being born forced me to face a lot of myself. It forced me to, well, it was the first time I actually physically met my own biological blood with no engineering involved, no calling of an agency, none of that. It was your daughter. She sees me and she's like, that's my dad. And for a person that was stripped, right? Because what people have to understand is that there's something called a primal womb, right? And again, you can go and do your own research and go deep into this, but there's this idea that if you take a baby and you strip them, this has happened throughout history in many scenarios where if you strip a baby away from the mother, because the mother was carrying the baby in the womb for so long, 10 months, that's all they know, that when you strip that baby apart at such an early age, in such the early periods in which those connections have to happen, it literally changes the biology of the baby. It literally changes the way in which how you interact socially and emotionally and just everything about you. It literally disrupts that. Now, it could be repaired. It takes a lot of work, but you don't have the head start like others do in some capacities. My daughter being born allowed me to really face myself, because when you have a young child looking at you, they also see your father, your mother, your uncle. They see your whole past. They see your whole future. Children are like literal gifts from God. They come directly from the source. The dead is going back, children are coming in. And so when they look at you, they're looking right past through every wall you grew or put up. And so for me, I did the work. I dived in. Did a lot of crying. Did a lot of therapy. I did a lot of work. But it was necessary work because it helped me and allowed me to grow so I could be the right father for her, but also just the right person for myself to navigate in this world in which the famous line, hurt people hurt people. And we have a whole generation due to social media, due to non-stop, non-in-person interactions where you're not getting a full feel for people. You're not getting a real connection with people. It's a fabricated connection digitally through audio waves and pixels, and it fabricates the connection that we would once feel if we were in the room together. It's not the same. I didn't want to continue the cycle. So did work, a lot of work, still doing a lot of work. This is part of it. This is part of it. And so the next connection point was, okay, I gotta meet the other person. I gotta meet the father. I gotta meet my dad. Never got to meet him yet, but I found him. And when I found him, I got what I was looking for. A person that was completely emotionally unavailable. Now, that is my perception. That is my perception of him. And I say that because he has a story. His story wasn't all that either. His story was kind of fucked up. He's Italian. I also found out his mom, my grandmother, was Jewish, and her grandparents were Holocaust survivors. And when they came here into America, he had a rough childhood and grew up no love, no affection. And like most men in the 80s, went out, did their thing, and dipped out. And he did that with a lot of them. So if I got any brothers and sisters out there that's watching this, all right, we out here. And I found another brother. I mean, guys, if I go about my personal story, it just gets interesting, and it will open up dialogue in the future with others. But for the most part, these dots connected for me. What did these dots point out to me? What did all of this point out? It pointed out that I was in a cycle of trauma. Right? I was in a cycle of trauma. His grandparents. Okay, my mom. What happened to her? My other grandmother. Well, she was adopted. And, well, put it like this. She wasn't adopted. She was abandoned. And she was abandoned because she was black. Because during Jim Crow, interracial, no. So somebody left a black baby on somebody's doorstep somewhere in Florida. And they found that baby and it was like, oh, okay. It's a baby out here. So confusion, pain, no direction, no guidance, no support. These things that it's embedded in our family trees. It's embedded in our genes. It's embedded in us. Now, you'll hear people say, well, you could think your way out of it. Listen, fam, there's a lot of stuff buried in you. And this is why it's important to tap into the body. Because the body is the first layer. When you get through the body, you start tapping more into your spirit. Because your body is a vessel that essentially teaches you have something that you have to be responsible for. That's why I got into fitness.